Homeless man asks Patrick Mahomes, "Can you give me $1?" Mahomes' response is shocking. "We dream of reaching 1,000 followers by the end of February. Subscribe and be part of our dream too. Thank you." The Kansas City skyline shimmered under the late morning sun as Patrick Mahomes strolled through the vibrant downtown streets. It was a rare day off from his rigorous schedule, and he relished these moments to disconnect from the blinding lights of stadiums and adoring fans. Dressed casually in a hoodie and sneakers, he blended effortlessly into the crowd, unnoticed by most. Patrick wasn't just walking for leisure. He was searching for clarity amid the whirlwind of fame, fortune, and responsibility that defined his life. As he passed a bustling coffee shop, the scent of freshly brewed espresso mingled with the crisp winter air. The laughter of families and the chatter of business meetings filled the space around him, grounding him in a world that felt distant despite his celebrity status. His thoughts wandered to his younger self, a kid with big dreams who could barely imagine the life he now lived. But beneath the joy of his success lay a persistent ache, a desire to connect with something more meaningful than endorsements and trophies. Turning a corner, Patrick noticed a man huddled on the sidewalk. The cardboard sign beside him read, "Just $1 can change a life." His clothes were tattered, his face weathered by years of hardship. A loyal golden retriever lay at his feet, its eyes reflecting a quiet companionship. The scene struck a chord in Patrick, a vivid reminder of how fleeting fortune could be. He stopped a few feet away, watching as passers-by hurried along, their gazes either indifferent or deliberately averted. For a moment, Patrick hesitated. The man didn't look up, his focus on the worn paper cup in his hand, which jingled faintly with a few coins. The world around them seemed to pause as Patrick took a step forward, his heartbeat steady but purposeful. This wasn't just another encounter. It felt like the beginning of something he couldn't yet define. Robert sat slumped against the cold brick wall, his tattered jacket barely shielding him from the biting wind. His dog, Max, rested beside him, a calming presence in an otherwise harsh world. For years, Robert had occupied various corners of the city, always hoping each day would bring some relief. Once, he had a life full of promise, a steady job, a small apartment, and dreams of owning his own garage. But life had a way of unraveling, and for Robert, it unraveled faster than he could stitch it back together. The rhythmic tap of shoes on the pavement was a sound he'd grown accustomed to, each step signaling another passerby who would glance away or pretend not to see him. Yet, today something felt different. A shadow loomed longer than usual, and the steps slowed until they stopped just a few feet away. Robert hesitated to look up, expecting either another quick dismissal or a handful of loose change tossed his way. But when a voice broke the silence, it carried a warmth he hadn't heard in a long time. "Hey," the man said, kneeling down to meet his eyes. "How's it going?" Surprised, Robert finally looked up, his tired eyes meeting the face of Patrick Mahomes. He didn't recognize him as a superstar quarterback. To Robert, he was just another kind stranger who, for once, seemed interested in more than just dropping a coin and walking away. "I've had better days," Robert muttered, his voice hoarse from both the cold and disuse. Patrick glanced at the sign leaning against the wall and then at Max, who wagged his tail cautiously. "Here, buddy?" Patrick asked, gesturing toward the dog. "Yeah," Robert replied, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "He's been with me through it all." The simplicity of the exchange broke through the invisible barrier that often separated Robert from the world around him. Patrick's genuine interest caught him off guard. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, Robert felt seen, not as a man asking for spare change, but as a human being with a story worth hearing. Patrick stayed crouched, his gaze steady and warm. "What's your name?" he asked. "Robert," the man replied, his voice low, as if unused to the sound of it. "And this here's Max." He reached over and gave his dog a gentle pat. Max wagged his tail, his loyal eyes darting between Robert and the stranger. Patrick smiled. "Nice to meet you, Robert. I'm Patrick." He extended his hand, and Robert hesitated for a moment before shaking it. The small act of dignity felt like a lifeline, a reminder of a world he thought had forgotten him. "What brings you out here today?" Patrick asked, glancing at the handwritten sign. His tone wasn't accusatory, just curious, as if genuinely wanting to know. Robert chuckled bitterly. "What brings me here? Life, I guess." He paused, his eyes searching the ground, as if the cracks in the pavement might hold answers. "I used to be a mechanic. Loved working on cars. Had my own shop plans, you know. Then the layoffs came. Bills piled up, and before I knew it, he gestured vaguely to his surroundings. This became my life." Patrick listened intently, his expression softening. He noticed the weariness etched into Robert's face, the kind that comes not just from exhaustion, but from the weight of dreams deferred. "That's tough," Patrick said after a moment. "But you're still here. That counts for something." Robert shrugged, his fingers fidgeting with the edge of his sign. "Barely. Some days, it feels like I'm invisible. People don't see me. They see a nuisance, an obstacle on their way to wherever they're going." He glanced up, meeting Patrick's eyes for the first time. "But you stopped." Patrick felt a lump rise in his throat. "Everyone deserves to be seen," he said simply. "You've got a story, Robert, and it's worth hearing." For the first time in a long while, Robert smiled, a real, genuine smile. The conversation wasn't just about money anymore. It was about connection, about reminding Robert that he mattered. And though he didn't know it yet, Patrick's next words would shift everything. The silence that followed Patrick's words was broken only by the distant hum of traffic and the occasional bark from Max. Robert's smile faded into a look of guarded curiosity. He'd had conversations before with kind strangers, but they usually ended the same, with a sympathetic nod and a few coins in his cup. This time felt different, though he couldn't quite put his finger on why. Patrick reached into his pocket, pulling out his wallet. Robert's eyes followed the movement, but he averted his gaze quickly, not wanting to appear eager or expectant. Patrick flipped through a few bills, his expression thoughtful, before pulling out not a single dollar, but a crisp bundle of notes. "This isn't just a handout," Patrick said, placing the money firmly into Robert's trembling hands. "It's a chance to start over." Robert stared at the money in disbelief, his fingers curling around it as though afraid it might vanish. I can't take this," he stammered, shaking his head. "It's too much." Patrick smiled gently. "You can, and you will. But on one condition. Promise me you'll use it to get back on your feet. Whatever that looks like for you." Tears welled in Robert's eyes, and his grip on the money tightened. "I don't know what to say. No one's ever." His voice cracked, and he looked down, overwhelmed by the weight of the moment. Max nudged his hand with his nose, as if to reassure him. Patrick sat beside him on the cold pavement, unbothered by the stares of passers-by. "You don't have to say anything," he said. "Just take it one step at a time, and when you're ready, pay it forward. Help someone else who needs it." Robert nodded, his tears spilling over. "I will. I swear I will." As Patrick stood, Robert scrambled to his feet as well, the money still clutched tightly in his hand. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "You have no idea what this means to me." Patrick gave him a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "I think I do." As Patrick walked away, leaving Robert to process what had just happened, the quarterback felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had no doubt that the man and his loyal dog would make the most of this second chance. And as the crowd around them resumed its hurried rhythm, Patrick realized that this moment, this connection, was worth more than any touchdown or trophy. Robert sat on the edge of his makeshift bed in the shelter that night, the bundle of bills still clutched in his hand. The crisp notes felt foreign, almost unreal, as though they belonged to someone else. He glanced at Max, who lay curled up beside him, his tail thumping gently against the floor. "What do you think, buddy?" Robert murmured. "Think it's time we turn things around?" The next morning, Robert rose earlier than usual. The shelter buzzed with activity as people lined up for breakfast, but his mind was elsewhere. He didn't just want to survive anymore, he wanted to live. He tucked the money into an envelope and placed it deep in his pocket, determined not to squander the opportunity Patrick had given him. His first stop was the Community Resource Center, a place he had avoided in the past out of pride. The receptionist greeted him with a warm smile, her kind demeanor easing his nerves. "How can we help you today?" she asked. Robert hesitated before replying. I'm looking for a way to get back on my feet. Maybe some job training or something to start fresh. The receptionist nodded and handed him a pamphlet. You're in the right place. We have workshops for career development and access to housing resources. Let's get you signed up. As he filled out the forms, a flicker of hope ignited within him. It had been so long since he'd taken proactive steps toward his future that the act itself felt like a triumph. Later that afternoon, he attended his first workshop, a session on financial literacy. Sitting among others with similar stories, Robert felt a sense of camaraderie. The speaker, a former accountant who had once faced homelessness himself, shared practical tips on budgeting and saving. No matter where you are, he said, it's never too late to start over. Robert clung to those words. He walked out of the center that day with a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in years, he felt like the world wasn't just something to endure. It was a place where he could rebuild. With Max trotting faithfully by his side, Robert headed toward the next chapter of his life, determined to honor the faith Patrick had placed in him. Robert woke up the next morning with a sense of determination he hadn't felt in years. The memory of Patrick's gesture and his simple yet powerful words echoed in his mind. It's a chance to start over. He decided to put every resource and opportunity to use. After feeding Max, he revisited the Community Resource Center, ready to dive deeper into rebuilding his life. While reviewing job training options, one flyer caught his attention, a free certification program in automotive repair. It felt like fate. Working with cars had always been his passion, and the idea of returning to it filled him with a mix of excitement and fear. Could he still do it after so many years? He signed up for the program, which was set to begin in 2 weeks. That same afternoon, Robert wandered into a thrift store to purchase clothes suitable for his new journey. As he browsed through the racks, he struck up a conversation with the store owner, a retired mechanic named George. Looking for something specific? George asked, noticing Robert's meticulous search. Just something decent for classes, Robert replied, his voice tinged with nervous excitement. I'm starting an auto repair program soon. Used to work on cars before. Well, before life happened, George's eyes lit up. Auto repair? Huh? That's a good trade. I own a shop for 30 years before retiring. Miss it every day. Robert hesitated before asking, you ever think about going back? Even part-time? George laughed, a hearty sound that filled the small store. More times than I can count. But I don't have the energy to run a business anymore. His gaze turned thoughtful. Why do you ask? Robert explained his situation briefly, leaving out the most painful details. George listened intently, nodding along. Tell you what, George said, rubbing his chin. I've got some tools and equipment in storage that I don't use anymore. If you're serious about this, I'd be happy to help you get started. Robert was stunned. Are you serious? I couldn't ask for that. You didn't, George said with a grin. I offered. Besides, it's good to see someone passionate about the trade. Stop by tomorrow, and we'll take a look. Walking out of the store with a bag of clothes and George's promise in hand, Robert felt a spark of hope that was impossible to ignore. The pieces of his life, long scattered and broken, were slowly coming together. For the first time in years, he began to see a future where he wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. 2 weeks later, Robert arrived at the community college for the first day of the automotive repair certification program. The classroom buzzed with energy as students, young and old, filled the seats. Robert took a spot near the back, feeling a mix of excitement and trepidation. It had been years since he'd sat in a classroom, and doubts crept into his mind. What if I've forgotten everything? What if I'm not good enough anymore? The instructor, a no-nonsense woman named Ms. Tanner, began the class by outlining the program's goals. This course isn't just about fixing cars, she said, pacing the room. It's about solving problems and building trust with your clients. You're not just mechanics, you're problem solvers. The words struck a chord in Robert. He had always taken pride in solving problems for his customers, ensuring their cars ran smoothly and safely. As the class dove into the basics, he realized his hands still remembered the trade. Muscle memory guided him as he practiced diagnostics on the training vehicles, and the hum of engines felt like a familiar song. But the road wasn't without its bumps. Balancing the program with daily survival proved challenging. His days were packed with classes, workshops, and part-time jobs to cover his basic needs. Max, his loyal companion, waited patiently at the shelter during the day, his wagging tail greeting Robert each evening like a beacon of encouragement. One afternoon, as Robert struggled to troubleshoot a stubborn engine in the college's workshop, a younger student scoffed from across the bay. "Looks like the old guy's out of his depth," the student muttered to his friends, loud enough for Robert to hear. The word stung, but Robert didn't retaliate. Instead, he focused harder, recalling a technique he'd learned years ago. After a few tense minutes, the engine roared to life. The workshop fell silent, and Ms. Tanner approached, her expression one of approval. "Well done, Robert. That's exactly the kind of persistence I'm looking for." Despite small victories like this, the weight of his journey often felt overwhelming. One night, as Robert counted his dwindling savings, he wondered if he was pushing himself too far. Yet the thought of Patrick's gesture and the faith of people like George and Ms. Tanner kept him moving forward. He couldn't let them down, or himself. The setbacks were real, but so were the glimpses of progress. And as Robert fell asleep that night, Max curled beside him. He reminded himself that change wasn't meant to be easy. It was meant to be earned. The workshop buzzed with activity as students worked on their final project, repairing a severely damaged vehicle that hadn't run in years. Robert stood before the car assigned to him, its rusted frame and tangled wires a daunting sight. It wasn't just a test of skill. It was a chance to prove to himself and everyone else that he still had what it took. For days, Robert worked tirelessly, often staying late to troubleshoot issues. He carefully rebuilt the engine, replaced corroded parts, and rewired the electrical system. Max waited patiently outside the college, and Robert would take breaks to sit with him, finding solace in his dog's unwavering loyalty. Despite the progress, setbacks piled up. A misaligned component here, a faulty wire there. Each misstep felt like a reminder of how far he had fallen. One evening, as he sat staring at the open hood, doubt gnawed at him. His classmates had mostly completed their projects, while he was still struggling to get the engine running. The younger student who had mocked him earlier walked by, smirking. "Maybe it's time to admit this isn't your thing, old man." The words stung, but this time they sparked something else, determination. Robert clenched his fists, refusing to let frustration consume him. He thought back to Patrick's words, "It's a chance to start over," and George's promise, "If you're serious about this, I'll help you get started." He couldn't let their faith go to waste. The next day, George arrived at the workshop unannounced, carrying a toolbox. "Heard you might need some backup," he said with a grin. Together, they tackled the stubborn engine. George's years of experience and Robert's hands-on effort turned the task into a lesson in perseverance. George's calm guidance reminded Robert why he had fallen in love with cars in the first place. The problem-solving, the artistry, and the satisfaction of bringing something back to life. By nightfall, the car's engine finally sputtered, then roared to life. The sound echoed through the workshop, drawing the attention of students and instructors alike. Robert's heart swelled with pride as he stood back, grease-stained and exhausted, watching the vehicle come alive. Miss Tanner approached, clapping her hands. "Excellent work, Robert. This isn't just a passing grade. It's a testament to your grit and determination." The achievement marked a turning point in Robert's journey. It wasn't just about the car. It was about rebuilding himself piece by piece. As George clapped him on the shoulder and Max wagged his tail enthusiastically, Robert realized that for the first time in years, he felt truly capable of steering his life in the right direction. Robert's confidence soared after his victory with the car. The sense of accomplishment felt like a long-lost friend, reminding him of the capable man he once was. As his certification program neared its end, Miss Tanner pulled him aside one afternoon. "Robert, I have to say, your work has been impressive. Have you thought about what's next?" Her words lingered in his mind. While he had been focused on surviving each day, the future remained an uncertain fog. That evening, he sat outside the shelter with Max, staring up at the city lights. He thought about his journey, the struggles, the people who had helped him, and the dreams he had nearly abandoned. Then it hit him. It wasn't just about rebuilding his life. It was about using his second chance to help others who, like him, had fallen through the cracks. The next day, Robert returned to George's thrift shop with an idea brewing in his mind. "George, you mentioned having tools and equipment in storage," he began. "I've been thinking, what if we started something? A small garage, not just for repairs, but to teach others like me, people who need a second chance." George leaned back, his eyebrows raising in surprise, then slowly nodded. "That's ambitious, Robert, but I like the sound of it." Encouraged, Robert dove into planning. He connected with the Community Resource Center and pitched his idea. A community-driven garage where people could learn skills, find mentorship, and rebuild their lives through honest work. To his surprise, the center was eager to support the initiative, offering to connect him with local sponsors and organizations. One evening, while finalizing the plans, Robert received an unexpected phone call. The voice on the other end was familiar. "Robert, it's Patrick Mahomes. I've been following your progress through George. Heard you're working on something big." Robert's breath caught. "Patrick, I didn't think I'd hear from you again." Patrick chuckled. "I told you I believed in you, and I meant it. George told me about your idea for the garage. I want to help. Let me fund the startup costs." Tears welled in Robert's eyes. The generosity Patrick had shown him before had already changed his life. But this was something beyond his wildest dreams. "I don't know how to thank you," he managed to say. "You already have," Patrick replied. "Just keep paying it forward." As the conversation ended, Robert sat in silence, the phone still in his hand. This wasn't just a second chance for him. It was a chance to change lives. With Max curled up beside him and the plans for the garage taking shape, Robert felt a profound sense of purpose. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, he wasn't walking it alone. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. The abandoned lot George had offered for the garage was transformed into a bustling workshop with the help of volunteers from the Community Resource Center and local businesses. Patrick's generous funding covered the renovation and equipment, but it was Robert's vision that gave the space its heart. He insisted on a welcoming atmosphere, where people could find not only skills but also hope and support. As the grand opening approached, challenges arose. The city required additional permits, and unexpected repairs to the lot's infrastructure stretched the budget. Robert worked tirelessly, often staying late into the night to oversee the progress. Max became a familiar presence among the volunteers, earning the affectionate nickname Shop Dog. The obstacles were frustrating, but each one reminded Robert of how far he'd come. He wasn't just fixing a garage, he was building a lifeline for others. One evening, as Robert reviewed the final checklist, George walked in with a thick binder in hand. "Thought you might need this," he said, placing it on the table. Robert flipped through it, his brow furrowing. "What's this?" "Every trick I learned in 30 years of running a garage," George replied with a grin. "You're going to need it." Touched by the gesture, Robert nodded. "Thanks, George. Couldn't have done this without you." The day before the opening, Robert stood in the middle of the newly christened Second Chance garage, taking it all in. The gleaming tools, the freshly painted walls, and the smell of new beginnings filled the air. Volunteers had painted a mural on one wall depicting a phoenix rising from the ashes, a symbol of rebirth and resilience. It was everything Robert had dreamed of and more. That night, a nervous excitement kept him awake. He thought about the people who might walk through the doors, people like him, searching for a way out of the darkness. He wanted them to see more than a workshop. He wanted them to see a future. By dawn, a small crowd had gathered outside the garage. Among them were former classmates, shelter residents, and even Ms. Tanner. Robert greeted each person warmly, his heart racing as he prepared to cut the ribbon. Patrick Mahomes arrived quietly, avoiding the spotlight, but offering a firm handshake and an encouraging smile. When Robert finally stepped forward to address the crowd, his voice was steady despite the weight of the moment. "This isn't just a garage," he began. "It's a place for new beginnings. I know what it feels like to think you've hit rock bottom, but I also know what it feels like to be given a second chance. This is for everyone who's ever felt overlooked, forgotten, or lost. Together, we'll build something incredible." The crowd erupted in applause as Robert cut the ribbon, officially opening Second Chance Garage. As people flooded inside to explore, Robert felt a profound sense of accomplishment. This was his moment, a testament to resilience, community, and the power of paying kindness forward. The opening of Second Chance Garage was met with enthusiasm from the community. Clients began arriving with vehicles in need of repair, while others came seeking opportunities to learn. The garage buzzed with life as Robert trained new participants, sharing his passion and expertise. Each day brought new faces and new stories, many echoing his own struggles. The garage quickly became more than a workshop. It was a sanctuary for those rebuilding their lives. But as the garage gained momentum, so did the challenges. A major issue arose when one of the donated lifts malfunctioned, damaging a client's car. Though no one was hurt, the incident shook Robert deeply. The client, a single mother who relied on her car for work, was devastated. "I don't have the money to fix this," she said, her voice trembling. Robert promised to make it right, even if it meant dipping into his already stretched budget. Late that night, as he worked tirelessly to repair the damage, doubt crept in. Was this dream too big? Am I setting myself and others up for disappointment? Max lay quietly nearby, his loyal presence a comfort as Robert wrestled with his fears. The next day, Patrick Mahomes unexpectedly stopped by the garage. "Heard you've hit a rough patch," Patrick said, leaning against the workbench. "Thought I'd check in." Robert looked up, exhaustion etched into his face. "It's harder than I thought," he admitted. "Every time I think we're making progress, something knocks us back." Patrick nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's life, isn't it? But the thing that matters is how you respond. You're not in this alone, Robert. You got a community behind you." Encouraged by Patrick's words, Robert rallied his team to address the challenges head-on. They held a fundraiser to cover the costs of new equipment, and George stepped in to help train volunteers on safety protocols. The sense of unity and determination in the garage was palpable. Together, they fixed the client's car, delivering it with an apology and a promise to do better. A turning point came one afternoon when a man walked into the garage holding a worn-out resume. "I heard this place gives people a second chance," he said, his voice hesitant. Robert saw a reflection of his former self in the man's weary eyes. "You've come to the right place," he replied, shaking his hand. As the days turned into weeks, the garage began to thrive. The setbacks didn't disappear, but they became opportunities for growth. One evening, as Robert watched the team work on a challenging repair, he felt a surge of pride. These weren't just co-workers. They were a family bound by shared struggles and triumphs. At the end of the day, as the sun set over the garage, Robert stood outside with Max, watching the lights flicker on inside. The mural of the Phoenix glowed softly, a reminder of how far they'd come. For the first time, Robert allowed himself to believe. They weren't just surviving. They were thriving. Months passed, and Second Chance Garage transformed from a fledgling workshop into a thriving community hub. Word spread across Kansas City about the garage that not only fixed cars but also rebuilt lives. People from all walks of life arrived seeking help, whether it was repairing their vehicles or learning a trade. Each day brought new challenges, but with them came new victories, proof that Robert's vision was making an impact. Robert stood in the garage one crisp morning, surveying the scene. The once empty lot was now filled with cars awaiting repair, and the team worked with a synergy that made him proud. George, now a frequent presence, guided new trainees with his seasoned expertise. The man who had come in with a worn-out resume was now one of the garage's most promising mechanics, his confidence growing with each passing day. A familiar car pulled into the lot, and Robert's heart skipped a beat. Patrick Mahomes stepped out, dressed casually but instantly recognizable. The team gathered around, their excitement palpable. Patrick approached Robert with a grin. "Had to see it for myself," he said, gesturing to the bustling garage. "This is incredible." Robert chuckled. "Couldn't have done it without you, Patrick. You gave me a second chance and the courage to believe in myself." Patrick shook his head. "You did the hard work, Robert. All I did was give you a little push." As the day went on, Patrick stayed to help with repairs, much to the delight of the team and clients. It was a reminder of how one act of kindness could ripple outward, creating connections and inspiring change. That evening, the garage held its first community celebration. The lot was filled with laughter, music, and the aroma of food from local vendors. Clients, trainees, and supporters mingled, sharing stories of resilience and hope. Under the glow of string lights, Robert took a moment to reflect. His journey had been anything but easy, but every setback, every doubt, had led to this moment. Ms. Tanner, who had quietly arrived earlier, approached him with a smile. "You've built something remarkable, Robert," she said. "This garage isn't just about fixing cars. It's about fixing lives." Robert nodded, his eyes misty. "That's all I ever wanted." As the night wound down, Robert stood by the mural of the Phoenix, Max sitting faithfully by his side. He ran his hand over the painted feathers, the symbol of rebirth and resilience resonating deeply within him. This wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning of a legacy, one that would remind everyone who walked through the garage doors that no matter how broken things seemed, they could always be rebuilt. Looking out at the celebration, Robert felt a profound sense of peace. He had found his purpose, and in doing so, he had given countless others the chance to find theirs. The words painted beneath the mural seemed to sum it all up. Second chances aren't given. They're created. Don't forget to subscribe to help us achieve our dream. Share where you're watching from in the comments, and may God bless you. Thank you for being a part of Fame Retold.